Captain Hyunji received the emergency transmission while her converted freighter was delivering medical supplies to a nearby mining station. At 35, she had spent most of her adult life hauling cargo between the outer worlds. But like many civilian captains, she had received basic military training during her service years. When the colonies started falling, she didn't hesitate to answer the call for defenders. "This is Captain Hyunji of the merchant vessel Steady Hope," she broadcast on the emergency frequency. "I'm en route to New Hokkaido with whatever help I can provide." Her ship wasn't much to look at, a 40-year-old cargo hauler with improvised weapon mounts welded to its hull, but it was fast and her crew was determined. By the time she arrived, 3 other converted freighters had already joined the fight. Captain Wonho commanded a former mining vessel called Iron Will, its industrial lasers repurposed for combat. Captain Sunmi brought her passenger liner Peaceful Journey, now carrying medical supplies instead of tourists. Captain Kyung piloted a salvage ship named Second Chance, its cargo holds filled with ammunition and spare parts. Together, they formed humanity's entire defensive fleet for the sector, 4 civilian ships against a hegemony battle group of 20 warships. The battle above New Hokkaido lasted 18 hours. The human defenders used every trick they knew, darting between asteroids, using the planet's gravity well to slingshot around enemy formations, and coordinating their attacks to maximize damage while minimizing exposure. Captain Hyunji found herself thrust into the role of fleet commander, not because of any formal authority, but because the other captains trusted her judgment under fire. "Wonho, take your ship behind that large asteroid and wait for my signal," she ordered over the comm. "Sunmi, I need you to draw their fire while Kyung makes his attack run. We can't let them get through to the evacuation ships." Down on the planet's surface, desperate families loaded their children onto whatever transport could carry them, while volunteer fighters with hunting rifles and farming equipment tried to slow the hegemony ground forces. The colonial militia, led by a former Earth military sergeant named Tai Hyun, fought a running battle through the grain fields and storage facilities, buying precious time for the civilian evacuation. "We're not going to be able to hold them much longer," Tai Hyun reported to Captain Hyunji during a brief lull in the fighting. "They've got heavy armor and air support. All we have are small arms and determination." The evacuation lasted 3 days, with the small human fleet constantly harassing the much larger hegemony force. They couldn't win a direct confrontation, but they could make the enemy pay for every minute, every mile, every life. When the last civilian transport finally jumped to hyperspace, carrying refugees to safety, Captain Hyunji's little fleet had been reduced to 2 barely functioning ships. "All vessels, this is Hyunji," she broadcast on a coded frequency to Earth Command. "New Hokkaido has fallen, but we got most of the civilians out. Estimate enemy losses at 4 cruisers and 8 fighters. They're not having the easy time they expected." Similar scenes played out across human space over the following weeks. The colony of New Sapporo held out for 6 days before falling. New Ulsan lasted only 2 days, but not before its defenders destroyed a hegemony supply depot. Each battle followed the same pattern, small groups of determined humans fighting against overwhelming odds, buying time for evacuations and making the enemy pay dearly for their victories. Admiral Vorthak commanded the assault on New Busan from his flagship, a massive dreadnought called the Dominator. The colony was one of humanity's most important outer settlements, home to nearly 1 million people and several crucial manufacturing facilities. Taking it would effectively cut human space in half and demonstrate the futility of continued resistance. "Begin the bombardment," Vorthak ordered, his golden eyes gleaming with satisfaction as he watched the display screens. His fleet of 30 warships moved into position around the planet, their weapons charging for a coordinated strike that would overwhelm the colony's defensive shields. Captain Hyunji had arrived at New Busan 2 days earlier with a small fleet of 12 converted civilian vessels, every ship that could be spared from other sectors. They had spent those 2 days preparing defensive positions, laying mines and coordinating with the planet's ground forces. Everyone knew this would likely be their final stand. "This is ground control to all defensive units," came the voice of Colonel Min-jae, the planet's military commander. Enemy bombardment has begun. All civilian transports begin evacuation procedures immediately. Defense fleet, you are cleared to engage at your discretion. The space battle that followed was unlike anything seen in human history. 12 civilian ships, most of them held together with spare parts and prayers, faced off against one of the most powerful fleets in the galaxy. Captain Hyunji coordinated the defense from her position near the planet's largest moon, using its gravity well to mask her fleet's movements. "They're trying to break us completely," she transmitted to Earth Command during a brief break in the fighting. "Standard tactics won't work much longer. We need a miracle, or we're all going to die out here." But even as the human defenders fought their desperate battle, strange reports were filtering back to Admiral Vorthak from across hegemony space. Entire patrol fleets had simply vanished without a trace. No distress signals, no debris fields, no survivors. At first, he dismissed these reports as equipment failures or navigation errors. Space was vast, and ships occasionally got lost. The pattern became harder to ignore when an entire battle group of 16 ships disappeared while investigating a human supply route near the Centauri system. The fleet had reported everything, normal during their last scheduled check-in. 6 hours later, when they failed to respond to communications, a search and rescue mission found only empty space. "Sir, we're intercepting coded human transmissions that keep mentioning something called the Awakening Protocol," reported Intelligence Officer Vex, a spider-like creature with compound eyes that reflected the bridge lights. "Our linguists can't determine what it means, but the frequency of these messages has increased dramatically since we began the offensive." Vorthak dismissed the concern with a wave of his clawed hand. "Desperate humans clinging to their myths and legends. Pay no attention to their meaningless chatter. Focus on the bombardment of New Busan." What the Hegemony Admiral didn't know was that far away, in the cold depths of Earth's solar system, something extraordinary was happening. Hidden facilities that had been dormant for thousands of years were slowly coming online, their ancient systems responding to signals that only they could recognize. Deep beneath the surface of Earth's moon, in caverns that no human had ever seen, quantum forges that had been silent since before recorded history began to sing with power. Automated assembly lines that had been waiting in darkness for millennia started to move, guided by artificial intelligences so advanced that they seemed almost magical. These systems had been built by humanity's ancestors, left behind as a final gift to their descendants. They had waited patiently through the rise and fall of civilizations, through humanity's first steps into space, through all the small struggles and victories that had brought the species to this moment. The Awakening Protocol had been activated, and something that had slept for 3,000 years was finally beginning to stir. The final shield generator protecting New Busan colony flickered like a dying candle in the darkness of space. For 3 days, Captain Hyunji and her small fleet of converted civilian ships had fought desperately against Admiral Vorthak's overwhelming force, but the outcome had been inevitable from the start. 12 patched-together freighters and cargo, haulers could only do so much against 30 hegemony warships. "Shield strength down to 12%, reported Lieutenant Chanwu from the colony's main defense center, his voice tight with exhaustion. "Generator 3 just went offline completely. We're running on backup power across the entire grid." Captain Hyunji floated in the bridge of her battered freighter. Steady hope, watching through the viewport as enemy fire lit up the darkness around them. Her ship's hull was scarred with blast marks, and half her weapon systems had been destroyed in the fighting. Around her, the remaining ships of humanity's improvised defense fleet were in similar condition, barely holding together, their crews pushed to the breaking point. "This is it, then," she whispered to herself, knowing that once the shields fell completely, there would be nothing to stop Vorthak's forces from bombarding the planet's surface. 2 million civilians huddled in underground shelters, waiting for either rescue or death. On his flagship Dominator, Admiral Vorthak watched the human shields flicker with cold satisfaction. His reptilian features twisted into what passed for a smile among his species as he prepared to give the order for final bombardment. The colony's surrender would be broadcast across human space, demonstrating the futility of resistance against hegemony might. "Prepare the planetary bombardment systems," he commanded his bridge crew. Once their shields fail, we will target the major population centers. Make sure the recordings are clear. I want every human in the galaxy to see what happens to those who defy us." But as Vorthak raised his clawed hand to give the final order, something impossible began to happen at the edge of the star system. His sensor operators stared at their displays in confusion as massive readings appeared where nothing should exist. "Sir, we're detecting massive gravitic distortions approximately 40 million kilometers from our position," reported the ship's sensor chief, her voice filled with uncertainty. "The readings are off the scale, larger than anything we've ever recorded." Space itself seemed to twist and bend as something enormous began to emerge from the darkness between dimensions. The distortions grew stronger, creating ripples in space-time that registered on every sensor in the system. Even the civilian emergency radios on New Busan's surface picked up the strange readings, as waves of energy washed over the planet. What materialized from those impossible distortions defied every law of physics that the galaxy's scientists thought they understood. A ship, if it could even be called that, slowly took shape in the void. It stretched nearly a full kilometer from bow to stern, its hull crafted from some kind of black material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The vessel's design was unlike anything in any known database, with sweeping curves and angles that hurt to look at directly. But most disturbing of all were the scars. The ship's obsidian hull was marked with blast patterns and impact craters that spoke of battles fought long before any living being had been born. Some of the damage looked recent, while other marks seemed to have been there for thousands of years. This was a warship that had seen action across the ages, a guardian that had fought in conflicts lost to history. What in the void is that thing? Vorthak snarled, his golden eyes fixed on the impossible vessel as it hung motionless in space. His sensor teams worked frantically to identify the newcomer, but their computers found no matches in any database. The ship simply didn't exist in any known records. The mysterious vessel, the Eternal Vigil, though none present knew its name, transmitted no warnings, no demands for surrender, no attempts at communication. It simply began to move with a grace that seemed impossible for something so massive. There were no visible engine emissions, no thruster burns, nothing to indicate how it was propelling itself through space. Then it opened fire. The first weapon discharge from the Eternal Vigil was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. A beam of pure energy, brighter than a star, lanced out from the vessel's forward section and struck one of Vorthak's heavy cruisers. The beam didn't just penetrate the ship's shields, it passed through them as if they weren't even there, phasing through the defensive barriers like they were made of empty air. The cruiser Brutal Fang exploded in a brilliant flash of light, its hull vaporizing so quickly that the crew didn't even have time to scream. One moment it was there, a 1,000-meter-long warship bristling with weapons, and the next it was nothing but expanding gas and debris. "Impossible," Vorthak breathed, watching his sensors confirm what his eyes refused to believe. "Their weapons passed right through our shields. That's not supposed to be possible." The Eternal Vigil continued its attack with methodical precision. Its weapons fired from angles that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space, striking targets from directions where no ship was visible. Projectiles appeared inside enemy vessels without passing through their hulls, while energy beams curved through space like guided serpents. Captain Hyunji watched the impossible battle unfold from her position near New Busan's largest moon. Her tactical display showed hegemony ships simply disappearing from her sensors, wiped from existence by weapons that operated beyond the laws of physics. When enemy forces tried to return fire, their attacks struck the mysterious vessel's hull and transformed into beautiful auroras of harmless light. "Are you seeing this, Chanwu?" she whispered into her communicator, her voice filled with awe. "Those weapons are phasing through dimensional barriers, and look at their defensive systems. Incoming fire isn't being absorbed or deflected. It's being converted into pure light energy." Down on the planet's surface, Lieutenant Chanwu pressed his face against the observation window of the defense center, watching the light show in the sky above. "It's like watching gods fight," murmured. "I've never seen anything like it." The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted exactly 47 minutes. One by one, Admiral Vorthak's supposedly invincible fleet was systematically dismantled by the lone vessel. Heavy cruisers that had conquered star systems vanished in bursts of light. Destroyers that had terrorized civilian populations were reduced to scrap metal by weapons that struck from impossible angles. Even Vorthak's mighty flagship found itself helpless against technology that seemed to exist outside the normal universe. All ships, retreat immediately. Vorthak finally roared into his communicator as his bridge shook under the impact of weapons that his shields couldn't even slow down. Emergency jump to hyperspace, scatter formation, get us out of here. But the Eternal Vigil seemed to anticipate every move. Ships trying to flee found their hyperspace engines mysteriously failing, while others discovered that their navigation systems were somehow redirecting them toward the mysterious vessel's weapons. Of Vorthak's original fleet of 30 warships, only 6 managed to escape the system, and even those were severely damaged. The Admiral himself barely survived when his flagship's entire forward section was vaporized by a weapon that struck from inside the ship's own hangar bay. Only the emergency separation of the command module saved him from sharing the fate of his crew. As the last of the hegemony survivors fled into hyperspace, the Eternal Vigil hung motionless in space for several minutes as if considering whether to pursue them. Then, without warning, it transmitted a message across all frequencies in the system. The voice that spoke was human, but somehow ancient, carrying the weight of millennia. "The children of Earth remain under our protection," the message said simply. "This warning extends to all who would threaten them. We have watched. We have waited. We are here." Captain Hyunji tried to respond, to ask questions, to somehow communicate with the mysterious vessel, but her transmissions received no reply. The Eternal Vigil simply turned away from New Busan and began to fade from normal space, its hull becoming translucent as it phased back into whatever dimension it had emerged from. Within minutes, it was gone completely, leaving behind only scattered debris from the destroyed hegemony fleet and the stunned survivors trying to process what they had witnessed. The colony's shields came back online automatically as power was restored, but there was no longer any enemy fleet to defend against. As news of the impossible victory spread across human space through emergency channels, one question echoed in every transmission. What was that ship and where had it come from? But in the quiet corners of freight stations and trading posts, old spacers like Captain Jiho simply smiled their knowing smiles and raised their glasses in silent toast to guardians that most people still thought were just legends. The Eternal Vigil had awakened, and the galaxy would never be the same. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened just 3 days after the impossible battle at New Busan. News of the hegemony fleet's destruction had spread like wildfire across the galaxy, carried by survivors who spoke in hushed whispers about weapons that defied physics and a ship that appeared from nowhere to defend humanity's children. The Great Chamber buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 47 different species took their places. Many had arrived earlier than scheduled, their governments demanding immediate answers about what had happened in human space. The Crystalline Collective's ambassador, a being of living crystal that normally glowed with serene blue light, now pulsed with agitated yellow patterns. The Hive Queen's mandibles clicked constantly, a sign of extreme stress among her kind. The center of it all sat Admiral Vorthak, or what remained of him. The proud hegemony commander had been reduced to a shadow of his former self. His golden eyes, once blazing with confidence, now darted nervously around the chamber. Bandages covered burns across his scaled hide, and his left arm was missing entirely, replaced by a crude mechanical prosthetic. When he spoke, his voice shook with a mixture of fear and disbelief. The ship came from nowhere, he reported to the assembled delegates, his reptilian features twisted with confusion. Our sensors detected massive gravitational distortions. Then this thing materialized. A kilometer-long black as space itself, covered in battle scars from wars we've never heard of. It destroyed my entire fleet in less than an hour. "Impossible," declared the Machine Empire's representative, a towering robot whose optical sensors whirred as they focused on the Admiral. "No single vessel could defeat 30 hegemony warships. Your species has conquered 17 star systems. Your technology is among the most advanced in the galaxy. Vorthak's remaining hand clenched into a fist. "I know what I saw. Their weapons passed through our shields like they weren't even there. Energy beams that struck from angles that don't exist in normal space. When we fired back, our attacks were somehow converted into harmless light shows. It was like fighting something from another dimension. The Nebula Lords, existing as sentient gas clouds within their containment suits, pulsed with agitation. Their translated voice echoed through the chamber's speakers. We demand to know what the humans have been hiding from us. This cannot be some new technology they developed in secret." All eyes turned to the human delegation, sitting in their usual corner of the chamber. Ambassador Minho looked older than his 58 years, his black hair now streaked with premature grey from the stress of recent events. Beside him, Aide Sora sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, waiting for the storm that was about to break. The chamber fell silent as the Council's speaker, an ancient being whose species had served as neutral mediators for over 1,000 years, called the session to order. His voice, translated through dozens of language processors, carried the weight of authority that had settled countless disputes between warring civilizations. "Ambassador Minho," the speaker began, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the chamber's lights. "The Council demands an explanation for the events at New Busan. What was that vessel, and how does your species possess technology that surpasses anything in our combined databases?" For a long moment, Minho said nothing. He looked around, the chamber at the assembled aliens, many of whom had voted to strip humanity of its territories just months earlier. These same beings who had dismissed his people as insignificant now stared at him with a mixture of fear and desperate curiosity. Finally, he stood up slowly, his simple black suit making him look even smaller among the towering alien delegates. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. "The truth is something we've kept hidden for over 3,000 years, he began, his hands clasped behind his back. "We've let you believe that humanity evolved on Earth, that we're just another young species that recently discovered space travel. But that's not the real story." He paused, looking directly at Admiral Vorthak before continuing. "Humanity didn't evolve on Earth. We were refugees, the last survivors of an ancient civilization that once shepherded this entire galaxy. Our ancestors didn't just explore space, they were the ones who first mapped it, who established the hyperspace routes you all use today, who built the quantum communication networks that still connect your worlds." The chamber erupted in disbelief. The Hive Queen's mandibles clicked so rapidly they sounded like machine gun fire. The Crystalline Collective's representative flashed angry red patterns, while the Machine Empire's robot began calculating probabilities at visible high speed. "Lies!" roared the Hegemony's backup admiral, a younger reptilian who had taken Vorthak's place. "Humans have been in space for less than 2 centuries. We have detailed records of your species' development. You were barely capable of spaceflight. When our scouts first encountered you," Minho nodded calmly, "that's what we wanted you to think. Our ancestors made a deliberate choice to hide their true nature after a catastrophic war that nearly destroyed the galaxy. They seeded dozens of worlds with human colonies, then retreated to Earth to heal and grow strong again, waiting for the day when their children would be ready to reclaim their heritage." Aide Sora stood up and activated the chamber's holographic display system. The air above the center of the room shimmered as 3-dimensional images began to appear. Archaeological sites from across the galaxy, ancient ruins carved with symbols that were unmistakably human in origin. "These are excavation records from 47 different worlds," Sora explained, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. "Ruins that predate any known civilization by thousands of years. Look at the writing systems, the architectural patterns, the mathematical constants carved into the stone. They're all human in origin." The images shifted to show genetic analysis data, complex molecular structures that few in the chamber could fully understand. DNA samples from extinct species across the galaxy show genetic markers that are identical to human sequences. The probability of this occurring naturally is so small that our scientists stopped calculating after the decimal point reached 27 places. But the most damning evidence came last. Sora's fingers danced across her control tablet, and suddenly the chamber's own AI systems began displaying code that none of them had ever seen before, buried so deep in their programming that it had gone unnoticed for centuries. Every artificial intelligence in this galaxy contains recognition protocols, she continued, her voice growing stronger as she revealed humanity's greatest secret. Protocols that identify humans as the first builders. Your own computer systems know who we really are, even if you've forgotten. The chamber fell completely silent as the implications began to sink in. These weren't just claims or theories. This was hard evidence that humanity had been lying about their origins for millennia. More than that, it suggested that every advanced civilization in the galaxy owed its existence to human ancestors. Ambassador Minho walked to the center of the chamber, standing directly beneath the holographic displays. Ships like the Eternal Vigil were left as guardians when our ancestors went into hiding. Automated protectors programmed to activate only when humanity's survival was truly threatened. They've been sleeping in hidden bases throughout the galaxy, waiting for the day when they would be needed. He looked directly at Admiral Vorthak, his expression mixing pity with steel. You haven't been bullying a minor species that recently learned to build rockets. You've been provoking the sleeping descendants of the civilization that built the very foundations of galactic society. The same people whose ancestors created the hyperspace technology your ships use, whose quantum computers still run your governments, whose star maps guide your explorers to new worlds. The Nebula Lords pulsed with what their translators identified as extreme agitation. If this is true, then why hide it? Why pretend to be weak when you possessed such power? Minho's expression grew sad. Because the last time our ancestors tried to guide galactic civilization, it ended in a war that killed trillions and left entire star systems as radioactive wasteland. They chose isolation and secrecy, hoping that the younger species would learn to govern themselves without repeating the mistakes of the past. The chamber remained silent for long minutes as the assembled delegates processed what they had heard. Many were running quick calculations on their personal devices, checking historical records against the evidence Sora had presented. Others were communicating frantically with their home governments, trying to figure out how this revelation would affect existing treaties and power structures. Finally, the speaker cleared his throat with a sound like grinding stones. If what you say is true, Ambassador Minho, then the Council owes humanity a considerable apology, but it also raises troubling questions about what other secrets your people have been keeping. Minho nodded gravely. The Guardians were our last secret, and that secret died at New Busan. From now on, humanity will take its proper place in galactic affairs, not as conquerors, but as the elder siblings we were always meant to be. As the session ended and the delegates began filing out of the chamber, each lost in their own thoughts about what this meant for the future. One thing was clear: the galaxy would never be the same again. The children of Earth had finally come. Combert Admiral Vorthak sat alone in his private quarters aboard the medical frigate that had become his temporary home. The once proud hegemony commander stared at his reflection in the darkened viewport, barely recognizing the broken figure looking back at him. His missing arm ached constantly, a phantom pain that reminded him of his humiliation at New Busan. But worse than the physical wounds was the knowledge that his entire career, built on 3 decades of military victories, had been destroyed in less than an hour by a single impossible ship. The official reports called it a tactical withdrawal, but everyone knew the truth. The mighty hegemony fleet had been utterly crushed by technology that shouldn't exist. Vorthak's superiors had stripped him of his command, his medals, and his pension. They needed someone to blame for the disaster, and he was the perfect target. But as the weeks passed and the full implications of humanity's revelation sank in, some within the hegemony military began to whisper that perhaps the Admiral had been right to fear the humans all along. Those whispers grew into secret meetings, held in darkened conference rooms far from the prying eyes of hegemony intelligence. Other officers who had lost ships to mysterious disappearances, commanders whose fleets had been decimated by forces they couldn't explain, gradually began to realize that they had all been fighting the same enemy, an ancient power that had been toying with them for years. "They made fools of us," growled Admiral Krex, whose battle group had vanished near the Vega colonies 6 months earlier. He was one of the few survivors found drifting in an escape pod with no memory of what had happened to his ships. "Humanity has been laughing at us while we conquered star systems, never realizing that we were just children playing with toys their ancestors had discarded." The secret meetings grew larger as more disgraced officers joined what they began calling the Final Gambit. Within 2 months, nearly 100 former hegemony commanders had pledged their support to Vorthak's desperate plan. But they couldn't do it alone. They needed ships, weapons, and allies from across the galaxy. Vorthak spent his remaining fortune bribing officials and calling in favors from contacts he had built over decades of military service. He promised deposed kings their thrones back, offered crime lords exclusive rights to entire star systems, and made deals with mercenary fleets that he had no intention of honoring. His message was always the same. Humanity had made fools of them all, and only by working together could they restore their honor. The response was overwhelming. Within 6 months, nearly 1,000 warships had gathered in the neutral zone between hegemony and machine empire space. They came from dozens of different species and factions, hegemony dreadnoughts flying alongside machine empire battle, cruisers, crystalline collective hunters working with Nebula Lord destroyers, and mercenary fleets that normally fought each other now united under a single banner of revenge. "This is our moment," Vorthak addressed the assembled fleet commanders. Via holographic conference, his remaining eye blazed with the fanatical fire of someone who had lost everything and now had nothing left to lose. "We will strike at the heart of human space, at Earth itself. We will show the galaxy that no species, no matter how ancient or powerful, can humiliate us and survive." The plan was simple in its brutality. The massive armada would jump directly to Earth's solar system and begin immediate bombardment of the planet's surface. No negotiations, no demands for surrender, just the complete destruction of humanity's homeworld as a warning to anyone else who might think themselves superior to the galaxy's established powers. As the fleet prepared for the final jump to Earth, intelligence reports began filtering in about strange activities throughout the Sol system. Automated mining stations had gone dark, navigation beacons were transmitting coded signals, and deep space sensors were detecting massive energy readings from previously empty regions of space. "They know we're coming," reported Intelligence Officer Vex, his compound eyes reflecting the bridge lights nervously. "Whatever defenses they have, they're preparing for us." Vorthak dismissed the concerns with a gesture of his remaining hand. "Let them prepare. We have 1,000 ships against their single planet. Even their ghost ship cannot stop an armada this size." The jump to Earth's solar system took place exactly at noon, Galactic Standard Time. One by one, the warships of the Final Gambit Armada materialized in space, near the orbit of Mars, their weapons charging as they oriented toward the small blue planet hanging in the darkness ahead of them. But as their sensors began to map the system, the fleet commanders realized that something was terribly wrong. Earth wasn't defenseless. It was surrounded by structures that shouldn't exist. Massive platforms hung in space around the planet, their hulls reflecting starlight in patterns that hurt to look at directly. What they had assumed would be empty space was actually filled with vessels that had been hiding in quantum stealth, invisible to normal sensors until they chose to reveal themselves. Captain Jiho stood on the command deck of Defense Platform 7, watching through the transparent aluminum windows as the enemy fleet tried to process what they were seeing. At 70 years old, he had finally been called to serve his species in a way he had never imagined. The old freighter captain now commanded one of humanity's most advanced defensive installations, a weapons platform that had been built by the same ancient technology that had created the Eternal Vigil. "Look at them," he said to his crew, his weathered face creased with a mixture of sadness and determination. "All those ships, all those people, come here to die because they couldn't accept that some things are better left alone." The ghost fleet that emerged from hiding around Earth made the Eternal Vigil look small by comparison. Ships that stretched for kilometers materialized from quantum stealth, their hulls bearing names in dozens of human languages. The Never Forget, a massive dreadnought that had been built to commemorate humanity's first war with an alien species, the final guardian, whose weapons had been designed to protect the last refugees of humanity's ancient empire. The Promise Keeper, which carried technology that could reshape entire star systems. There were dozens of them, each one a monument to humanity's hidden history, each one capable of destroying entire fleets single-handedly. They hung in space around Earth like protective angels, their ancient hulls scarred by battles, fought long before any of the attacking species had discovered fire. Admiral Vorthak stared at his tactical display in growing horror as his sensors tried to count the enemy vessels. Every few seconds another ship would decloak, revealing itself from quantum stealth that had kept it hidden for centuries. His 1,000-ship armada, which had seemed invincible just minutes earlier, now looked pathetically small compared to the forces arrayed against them. All ships. "Begin immediate attack," he screamed into his communicator, his voice cracking with desperation. "Focus fire on the planet itself. We can't let them—" His words were cut off as the Ghost Fleet opened fire. Weapons that manipulated space-time itself reached across millions of kilometers to cripple enemy vessels without apparent effort. Energy beams that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously struck targets that should have been protected by distance and defensive screens. The invasion fleet, which had taken months to assemble, was reduced to wreckage and escape pods in less than 20 minutes. But then something unexpected happened. The Ghost Fleet stopped firing. Captain Jiho watched as the ancient vessels held their positions, their weapons still charged, but no longer shooting at the survivors of the enemy. Armada. Around him, his crew looked confused as orders came through from Earth Command to cease all offensive operations and open communication channels. "This is Ambassador Minho, broadcasting on all frequencies," came the familiar voice over the comm system. "To the survivors of the invasion fleet, we offer you safe passage home. We have no desire to continue this conflict or to pursue those who chose to attack us." The message was broadcast in 47 different languages, ensuring that every species in the attacking fleet could understand it. "We know that fear and misunderstanding led you here. We know that our secrets seemed like threats to the order you thought you understood. But we are not your enemies, and we do not wish to be your conquerors." Vorthak, floating in the command pod of his destroyed flagship, listened to the transmission with tears streaming down his scaled face. He had come here expecting to die in glorious battle, to take as many humans with him as possible. Instead, he was being offered mercy by the same people he had tried to destroy. "We don't want an empire," Minho's voice continued, echoing across the solar system and being recorded by every surviving ship for transmission back to their home worlds. "We just want to be left alone to grow and explore among the stars. Our ancestors chose isolation because they learned that forced unity only leads to suffering. We will not repeat their mistakes by imposing our will on others." The ceasefire held. One by one, the surviving ships of the invasion fleet were escorted to the edge of the solar system and allowed to jump to hyperspace. Medical ships from Earth even provided assistance to vessels that had been too badly damaged to make the journey home on their own. As the last enemy ship disappeared into hyperspace, the Ghost Fleet began to fade back into quantum stealth. The Never Forget was the first to vanish, followed by the final Guardian and the Promise Keeper. Within an hour, only the Eternal Vigil remained visible, hanging in space near Earth's moon, like a monument to humanity's hidden strength. Then it too faded from normal space, returning to whatever dimension it called home, ready to answer the call if Earth's children were ever threatened again. In the weeks that followed, human freighters began traveling the space lanes with a new confidence. Pirates who had once preyed on human shipping found themselves mysteriously unable to complete their attacks. Officials who tried to shake down human merchants for bribes discovered that their threats no longer carried weight. Word had spread. Throughout the galaxy's underworld, humanity was protected by forces that made the hegemony military look like children playing with toy soldiers. Captain Jiho returned to his old life as a freighter captain, but now his cargo runs took him to places that had once been too dangerous for human ships. When questioned about the change, he would just smile that same knowing smile and mention something about old friends watching over us. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of underestimating those who seem weak. And somewhere, in the darkness between the stars, ancient guardians continued their eternal watch, ensuring that the children of Earth could grow and explore in peace.